I'm going to take my mask off so I can talk and you can hear me. Wow, it's a great crowd. We were obviously not expecting so many people to be here. Sorry, did you?
Just wondering about this spotlight on me.
Oh,
Does it have to be there?
yeah, we're not going to be able to.
Okay.
Scoot forward.
Yeah, maybe you
Right.
can. Welcome to Japanese American Museum of Oregon. I'm Mark Takaguchi. I'm the interim deputy director here. We're really excited to partner today with Multnomah County Libraries for their Everything Reads series. I'll go over some logistics briefly. So, first of all, today's free. So, how many people have been? Is this your first time at the museum? Oh wow!
Woohoo! Thank you.
Welcome. So glad. So great to have you here. Please come back. So this is going to last about 45 minutes with 15 minutes for Q&A. If at any time you need to use the restrooms, they're all the way to the back of the museum on your left. There's also a water fountain there. Trying to think if there's anything else. So after a very short intermission where you're free to walk around the museum, we will reconvene here for a book talk that will be facilitated by Allison, who's going to be?
A book discussion with Lauren over here and me from the library.
Yeah. So please stay for that. We'll be open till 5 today. So if you get a chance and want to stay, please look at the rest of the museum. Trying to think. I do want to advertise a few upcoming events that we have. So tonight at Reed College, and I'll pass some of these around. At 7 p.m. 7 p.m. we have an amazing set of performances that are happening. 2 Southern California artists and activists are going to be doing a performance tonight at 7 p.m. It's free, so please come see that. Tomorrow at Portland Center Stage, they'll be doing a workshop. So if anybody has people that are really interested in theater and movement and how to combine activism and art, please show up for that. That'll be at, is that 2 o'clock?
I think it's 1 to 4.
1 to 4, thank you. Also in 3 weeks, the week of February 18th, we'll be opening our next show, which is a long road to travel, which really features stories around World War II, specifically Nisei veterans who served in World War II, their families, and some really specific stories that center here in Portland and also Hood River, Oregon. So learn more about our country's history and our specific history of our locality then. So I won't say too much more. I do want, for everyone who's been a member here, thank you. For all of you that are new, we do these kind of events quite a bit, and they're always free. So what we're really counting on you to, if you can, make a donation today. We've got a donation box there. If you want a tax deduction, Kia will be at the front desk, so you can do that. But this is really important. We rely on all of you to keep our programs accessible, to do programming for school kids, and just to make sure that we can do this without charging people. So please give generously. So right now I want to introduce our Director of Engagement and Education, Melissa Dingus, who will introduce our esteemed speakers today. You're in for a treat.
Hello, everyone. It's really a pleasure to see all of you here today. I was just saying I don't think I've ever seen this many people in the museum, so thank you so much for coming out. It's really a treat to have you all here. And we are joined today by our 2 esteemed guests, Joni Kimoto, who is a 3rd-generation Japanese-American, also called a sansei. She's a survivor of World War II incarceration in Minidoka, Idaho, and a longtime docent here at the Japanese American Museum of Oregon. I see, okay, we're gonna go with microphone. Thank you. Again, it's lovely to see you all here today. I am joined by Joni Kimoto, a 3rd-generation Japanese American, a sansei. She's a survivor of World War II incarceration in Minidoka, Idaho, and a longtime docent for the Japanese American Museum of Oregon. And she's joined today by her granddaughter, Lauren, who's a 5th-generation Japanese American, a gosei. She's an accomplished writer and editor and is currently working with the museum on a project that will make the Japanese American history of this neighborhood more visible to the public. So round of applause for these two. All right, so I gave a tiny blurb about both of you. What else would you like to share about yourselves and your backgrounds?
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. This is going to be a really fun time with my granddaughter and I sharing our stories. I am Joni Kimoto Nakayama Reeves. I'm Nakayama Kimoto Reeves. And I'm a Native Oregonian. And I am an octogenarian. And I'm also a third generation Japanese American called a sansei. I'm a mother of 2 daughters. And I have the pleasure of having my eldest daughter with me today from Roseburg. Thank you, Lonnie. I also have 4 granddaughters and a great-granddaughters. So women rule in our family. But I do have 2 little great-grandsons who joined us recently. So that's been fun. That cycle has been broken. I just celebrated 7 years of marriage with that man sitting right there, Rod Reeves. He is a wonderful support and my dear love. And I'm so excited to be sharing this platform with my granddaughter, Lauren. She's so gifted. You'll hear from her soon. I have a long history here in the City of Roses. I'm a descendant of Japanese immigrants, pioneers, who once lived in this very district that you're sitting in now. Over 100 years ago, my great-grandparent and my grandparents worked very hard in this community, and they built up this community with their businesses. And you know this district today as Old Town. But 100 years ago, this was called Japantown, Nihonmachi. And it was a vibrant community of probably 200 businesses that lived here, 200 people that lived here. And it covered about 10 city blocks. But things changed. In 1942, this became a ghost town, where when America was at war with Japan, and Executive Order 9066 signed by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And my family and I were part of the 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry who were forced from our homes and unjustly imprisoned for 3 years. And we were labeled as being potentially dangerous because we looked like the enemy, and we were victims of racism, propaganda, economic resentments.
I'm sorry, Joni.
That's okay.
So this gentleman is hearing impaired.
Oh,
So if you could pass this Bluetooth as
Sure.
you talk. Thank you.
oh, okay. I don't know. Okay, thank you, Lauren. Thanks. Anyway, because of propaganda and economic resentment and a failed political system, we were American citizens, but we endured 2 dislocations. And the first was at the Pacific International Livestock Center here in North Portland, where farm animals once were housed, and then we were put there. And we stayed there for approximately 4 months. We lost our family name at that time, and we became numbers. And at that time, my number became 15259C. 4 months later, we moved by train with armed guards and shades pulled down, and we traveled to our second prison, which was located in a desolate desert in Minidoka, Idaho. We lived in tarred paper barracks, and we endured extreme temperatures and dust storms and long lines for meals and bathing and the use of latrines. We had been imprisoned behind barbed wire with guards who watched us with guns pointed inward. After Minidoka, I moved to Chicago with my family, and then to Tillamook, Oregon, and then I returned to Portland, and I spent my youth, and I lived one year here in Nihonmachi. I attended Grant High School, and then I went to a place called Multnomah Junior College. I don't know if any of you even heard of that place. It's no longer here. But I received an Associate of Science degree. My parents had been rebuilding their lives, and they experienced great economic setbacks, so I couldn't really go to college more than 2 years. I married a man from Hawaii, and we lived there, and both my daughters were born there. And then we returned to Portland in the 60s. I've had an interesting, enriched life, and I've lived in many places, and I've traveled, and I've had a variety of careers. I was a medical secretary. I worked for a detective agency in Hawaii, and I was an international project coordinator for an engineering firm, and I was even in cosmetic sales and became a tax preparer. But and then my late husband and I had an international business, and we traveled with the Japanese, and we traveled there greatly. But all of this background helped prepare me to learn about people and relationships. And I was always interested in my family culture and my history and social justice issues. And so 9 years ago, I started volunteering, and I became very involved with the Japanese American Museum as a docent. Today, I'm a story keeper and a storyteller, and I'm also very involved with my church and our social justice issues. Anyway, I want to thank you very much, and I'm going to hand this now to Lauren.
There's feedback for those two things. Oh. Yes.
Thank you. Oh, talk to us.
Alrighty. Hi, I'm Lauren Yoshiko Terry. I actually did not grow up in Portland. I grew up in Roseburg, Oregon, about 3 hours south of here, which is not a very diverse city, and my experiences were wildly different compared to Nana's childhood, being treated so specifically different for being Japanese that she was imprisoned, versus I had very little understanding of a Japanese experience until I moved to a place where I had more of a community of Japanese and Japanese Americans. And so we'll get into it more later, but my journey here has been very much a part of my experiences with my grandmother, have been my experiences understanding what being Japanese means and can mean and means for me, and also living in Portland and learning about the history of Japanese Americans here has been the biggest leap for me in being like, okay, I resonate with that. I don't feel the same resonance when I learn about the Japanese experience in Japan, but when I learn about this history 100 years ago, for example, and what it was like on these streets, it's very powerful to feel a sense of belonging that I had not felt before, growing up with wonderful friends that were all ethnically not Japanese. And we'll get into that, I'm sure, in the further questions.
Fabulous. Thank you. Joni, one thing that I know from stories that I've heard and from working at the museum is that a lot of Issei, that first generation immigrants from Japan, and then the Nisei, the second generation, didn't talk a lot about their experiences during the war with their families afterwards. You know, many decades of kind of not talking about it. Was that true in your family? And then how did that affect the way that you communicate with your own children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren?
Yes. My Issei grandparents and my second generation American-born parents who were or Niseis, never spoke to us growing up, and they wanted to put that past behind us. They were silent, and part of it, I think, is that they felt ashamed of being incarcerated, and they didn't want to remember those traumatic moments that they had. There's a Japanese word that's used, and it's called kodomo no tamini, for the sake of the children. They wanted our lives to be so much better than what they experienced. Most of my stories and my remembrances were anecdotal stories that were told to me by my parents, and they were always light, and they were full of levity, and they were happy and funny moments. And I never heard them speak of that dark period of their lives and the hardships that they had felt. Our conversations were always infrequent, and they were brief, and they never wanted to discuss any of our camp life. And this is why it affected me, being a parent. I felt that I needed to communicate with our children and our grandchildren. My late husband was born in Hawaii, and his experiences, he was a sansei, but his experiences were much different than mine. But we shared and we talked openly to our kids about all these experiences that we had. But I don't remember a lot of depth in our discussions about the trauma that my parents had. Everything changed when I had grandchildren. I think growing up, it was just different for them, and it was a different time, and so we shared a lot together. I used to talk to Lauren and her sister and her other cousins about what was happening in our lives, and I think we became a lot more closer because of that. So it was a different time, and growing up and having you be part of all of this and hearing our stories.
One thing I think is interesting in hearing more about Nana's memories of that time is her parents were so good about creating it, them not making her feel scared. They were so good at that when she left camp as a very young child, she actually missed camp. There were sentiments of, well, I'm not, when she was there as a young child, it's like everyone's Japanese around me. They're not saying mean names to each other. They're trying to make the best for everyone around them. So everyone's probably being, intentionally, mostly, hopefully, very kind to one another. And then she left camp, and it was the real world. How they treat Japanese people, wildly different. Even if you did see armed guards, now you have kids at school saying things to you. And I always thought that was a fascinating look at how the kids' parents did such a good job that when they left, it was almost culture shock leaving camp and being reminded, like, whoa, it's very different out here.
Thanks. The reason that I thought that this event might be a great thing to bring in as part of the Everybody Reads programming is that there's this theme that runs through that you've already touched on a little bit of this intergenerational connection between this granddaughter and her grandmother. And I know that you two are currently very close and connected. Has that always been the case, and how has your connection and relationship changed over time?
Growing up, yes, Lauren and her young sister would come to Portland frequently, and we would babysit because her parents were gone traveling. And we also had a lot of family times. We're a very close-knit family, and we shared a lot of very precious moments together, birthdays and anniversaries, and just celebrating and just being with each other. So it was always good to have Lauren around. Lauren one year came up and visited us in Portland. She was about 8 or 9 years old, and this is a very clear memory of my granddaughter. We took her to a street fair in the Belmont district, and there was this huge rock wall. This was just kind of getting popular in those days. And she said, Nana, I want to climb that. And I said, honey, I don't know. That's awfully high. And she said, but I said, look, let's just kind of think about this. And I said, okay, I'll let you do this on the condition that you know exactly the path that you're going to take. And so we went through very carefully all the steps and where she was going to place her hand. And she had a little map in her mind of how she was going to do this. And by golly, that girl did. She got 35 feet high. And Lauren still has that determination and that tenacity. And that's one of the reasons I'm so very proud of her. She's really a great granddaughter. After the death of my husband, my late husband, Lauren came to live with me. She had just graduated from UC Santa Cruz, and she was making her way in the world. And so she said, can I come live with you? And I said, of course you can. And that was a wonderful time that, I hadn't seen Lauren too much during her high school years and college, of course. But when she came up, that's when we really started connecting. We would laugh and we would talk and we have wonderful late night discussions about life. And it was just a wonderful time that we had together. And over the time, Alyssa asked if our connection has changed, and it has. Lauren and I started sharing some meaningful events and projects together. And I remember, being a docent and a speaker, I had an event that I had to go to, and I was asked to do something for the Japanese American Museum at the waterfront park. And I called Lauren. I said, honey, do you think you can talk for me? And she did. I just kind of went over a few things, and she just got up there and yes. And people just said, wow, you've got quite the granddaughter there. So anyway, we're involved, and I'm so proud of her and that she's engaged with the museum, and she's also engaged with the future of this district, Portland's Nihonmachi. Yeah. Anyway, I can keep talking about you.
No, I do want to talk about the time we lived together, because looking back, of course, when you are a young person in your early 20s, you're not thinking about anything other than yourself and your current moment. But looking back, it's really a precious moment to me, because here we were, two women, generations apart, single women in the city. She's finding herself for the first time alone in the world since she was, how old were you when you married my grandfather?
In my early 20s.
Early 20s, so the same. I was a 22-year-old with no idea, with a literature degree in 2012, okay, here we go. And I had a desk job with whatever I could get up on Swan Island, driving in from, 136th at Nana's, and finding new rhythms in the same city as I'm getting to know this city for really the first time. Even if I had visited as a child living here, it was the first time I'm really driving around with Nana. And when she goes, that's where Kita Company used to be, and that is where your great-grandparents' store used to be. It's really crystallizing for me, and I'm going out to meet friends at a bar, and I'm like, wait, this is that street that Nana told me about. We have history here. And it was such a feeling of belonging, and I have roots here. I have history here that I had never felt in Roseburg. I looked different than my friends, and I got to have sort of like the one exotic kid at the high school novelty, and that I learned is not an identity. Actually, it's just something to get you through high school. And so us getting to be living together at a time where I'm really understanding the world for the first time, and she is understanding I have a whole nother life to live. My life isn't ending right now, and our eyes are very open. And it was also a very tumultuous time in the world where things were starting to happen with police brutality on a much more public scale. We're sitting here in the morning at breakfast talking about the Ferguson riots. It was a different time at family dinner tables everywhere. So think both of us had our eyes opened at a powerful time that led to us feeling like compelled to be more involved, and I continue to feel more rewarded by learning more about history, and that has been through my relationship with my grandmother.
That was really beautiful. Thank you for sharing. You started to touch on, and I want to dig more into, because again, it connects to the Ruth Ozeki's book with those themes of identity and belonging. And Lauren, you started to touch on that and your just sort of awareness and sense of identity and how it changed over time. Yeah, how have those concepts played a role in your life? I know it's very different for you, Joni. And then how do each of you at this stage of your lives think about your identity as a Japanese American?
Good question. Who am I? What is my identity and my belonging? You know, growing up, I did have a identity and belonging problem or issue, like the girl now in the book of The Tale of Time Being. I didn't want to be Japanese. I came out of the camps thinking that I was a little American girl, and then I discovered that I was the enemy, and I was a Jap. And I was an innocent child, but I was bullied, and I was victim of physical harm and hateful words. For me, being an American was being white, and I felt very ashamed of my heritage. During the post-war period of Japanese Americans, we still faced racist remarks and discrimination. We weren't encouraged to learn the Japanese language, and our Japanese culture at that time was not emphasized. It was important for my parents to assimilate, and the government had at that time encouraged us to do that after our release from camp. And growing up, I had learned, going to school with my Caucasian friends, mannerisms and slangs, and until they became a part of me. I felt American, but I didn't feel Japanese American. And then I think it was during my high school years that I was introduced to our community. Things were happening in Portland that was a lot different. There was a Japanese girls' social club, and I remember even taking Japanese dancing, and I even joined a bowling league that was for Japanese Americans. So then I started to connect. I kind of figured out, this is who I am. But I still didn't know about the incarceration. And it was in college that I really learned about what it was to be a Japanese American that was put away, that was interned during World War II. So my family's silence had led me to do my own research. And I had to rely on whatever was available at that time, which was very limited. There were no textbooks. So I went to the library, the public library, and I spent weeks there going through the microfiche. I don't know if any of you know what that is, but yeah, you would. Anyway, and at that time there were mostly newspaper articles and periodicals, and a lot of it was a lot of fake news and propaganda. But at that time, it opened my mind up, because I discovered and I realized that no country should decide what it means to be an American citizen. No one should be subjected to racism or racist policies or prejudice and rejection. Nobody. And it was interesting, years later, to know being a Japanese American was when I visited my ancestral country, Japan, because there I met my relatives. I recognized my heritage. I understood traditions and customs even more, and I saw that we looked alike. But I knew I didn't belong there, and I never felt more American than when I visited Japan.
Yeah, I believe that. So my father is white and I'm half Japanese, and that already you're in a new sort of territory outside of being whatever Japanese American is. And so I think I didn't realize how little a sense of identity I had until I went to college and met more Japanese American or Japanese immigrants that were going to college with me, and they were just completely other people to me. I felt no relationship. I didn't know the slang. I didn't know the food their moms were sending them home with. I didn't know the parties they were talking about. I didn't have a Lunar New Year tradition. I truly, until I was in my mid-20s, I knew about, a handful of Japanese words in the kitchen. I knew gohan and ohashi. I knew less than the average server at a Japanese restaurant in Portland of Japanese culture in many ways. And I didn't speak the language. My mother didn't speak the language. I never had experiences of an immigrant kid translating for their family and explaining American customs. I was learning Japanese customs, sometimes from white people, sometimes from black people. It was a sense of distance from the Japanese culture in America. We love it. We love the food. We have, Lost in Translation set in Japan, and it was a huge movie. So it's around you, and yet this foreign thing that I knew only as well as any of my friends did that were into anime. And once I was in Portland, it was like realizing that this Japanese American identity can exist, and it's okay to be Japanese and not speak Japanese, that I still have a place and an identity, that there is no such thing as being Japanese American enough. And I am not less than because I did not grow up with some of these, that I don't know how to make some of these dishes, and I maybe don't like some of these dishes. That's okay. I am still a Japanese American. I'm still legitimate in my identity. And that has been the largest realization. And because of how much times change and how much our population has changed in Oregon, if I didn't study some of our history and if I didn't study Nihon Machi as much as I have for some of the writing projects I've done, I wouldn't have that much of a sense, because it's sad we've lost so much of that history. It's very rewarding to see how all these different intelligent, innovative businesses that were thriving attractions to this neighborhood. Like something like 30 bathhouses operated in these 20 blocks 100 years ago, and people from all over town, athletes, lumbermen, all kinds of people would come and have a soak and a wash and then head on out for a night on the town, gambling and having fun. But that is, an ongoing journey, right? All of us are always seeking understanding of our identity, and I think, I joke that I've never felt more at home than the pilgrimage to the Minidoka camp that I got to attend a few years back. We hit 75 years since, I believe, from the internment camps during World War II, and as many people as possible and their family members went to this random part of southeast Idaho, and we walked through the camps together, and it was all these Northwest Japanese Americans. Everyone's wearing hand-me-down North Face and REI. Everyone brought their reusable water bottles, and it was like, these are my people. These are my people. I didn't feel that way walking through Tokyo. Just like Nana said, she never felt more American than going through Japan, and same. a beautiful place to visit. I got to connect with family and meet them there, but certainly not a place that I knew how to be at ease in, and a grateful tourist that I'm learning and always learning and finding connections. But it's a journey.
Wow. One last little question that's not on my list, which is there anything else that you feel like you wanted to share that we didn't already cover, or any new pieces that have come up as we've been talking about this that kind of bubbled up? I just wanted to make space for that, because I know sometimes it goes that way.
We're here because of intergenerational intergenerational relationships. I have a question. I always wondered, my daughter's sitting right there. I don't know if Lonnie wants to say anything, but something that I've always been curious about is when we were growing up and the girls were growing up and we touched on these things, whether or not they ever spoke or asked questions to their grandparents about what life was like.
Yeah,
Would you like to? Is that okay?
Of course.
Sure.
Here, you can come sit
This is my daughter Lonnie from Roseburg. Lauren's mom.
Lauren's mom. You're my mom. Yes. Your question about did people ask or did I ask? Excuse me. Yes, I did. As my mother has stated before, they were silent. They never talked about it. All they referred to it was camp. It was when we were at camp. I remember them showing lighthearted things. The yearbook, I guess Minidoka always did an annual. Yeah. And it had in there like the Queen of Valentine's Day or the gardens that they were doing or the dances that they were having. So it was all positive things that I saw in that book in that time. They never ever complained. They never ever talked about it. So really, it wasn't until my mom started getting involved and also my daughter being here with my mom and understanding, because I grew up in Portland, born in Hawaii, but really Portland is my home. I had my first job at Jake's Famous Crawfish. I went to Portland State, you know. Wow. So I am a Portland girl, and it's always fun to come back, like this weekend, to see my mom and my daughter. But when we all went to the Minidoka pilgrimage, that was very, very special and moving. And to hear my mother speak about my grandmother when they first pulled up on the buses, still makes me have tears in my eyes, that she looked at my mom because it was so dusty and she was covering her face with a handkerchief when they pulled up. And she said, "Joni, this is our new home." She looked at it as a positive thing because she didn't want her daughter to be scared and we were going to make the best of it. But it was an amazing thing to be a part of, to be with, as Lauren stated too, all these other Japanese people from the Pacific Northwest, all being there together and reliving and seeing and smelling the smells and feeling the dust and the grit in your mouth, knowing that that's what they went through. And it made me feel more connected to my grandparents then, and they were long gone. They had died many, many years before, but I felt so close to them. And we had, I think, 20 of our family that attended that together. Wow. So we had uncles and aunts and cousins, and we all got to experience that together. It was very special. And I am very proud of my mom and my daughter for being a part of this amazing museum. I'm so happy that it's here.
I know, I do want to
you.
say one more thing. That is the other thing that I did want to add on is the part understanding the internment, the incarceration as a part of the Japanese American experience is very important. That it is a part. The Japanese experience began long before the camps and it continued long after. And the fact that it continued long after, despite having everything taken from them, is incredible. The fact that these people had created an intensely rich community of businesses and legacies and literally started over in completely new careers and completely new cities or did the same thing from scratch again is so empowering. It's heartbreaking, but it's empowering. And you look at what has been built since. And while my grandmother dealt with ugly, ugly racism, and my mother dealt with the last, strains of the exact same racism, I did not experience that same hate. But what I did experience was the new sort of stereotypes of the model minority and, the perfect, quiet, do as you're told, the obedience, you're not a troublemaker, you're the opposite. And that has been something that also, I think, Japanese Americans are also still struggling with today, figuring out that being empowered to just be as you are, not feeling pressured to be more Japanese or less Japanese or whatever these ideas are, that I am excited for even seeing my grandmother, her sense of identity evolve. Like, it never changes. It's always shifting, and we're challenging it, and the more we talk about it, these silly ideas like the myth of the model minority get exploded, and being outspoken is more normalized, which is something I struggled with as well. But this has been a lovely dive into those things, and it's really special to have 3 generations.
Oh, well, I feel like I'm glad it was enjoyable for you. I feel like this has been such an enriching conversation between the both of you and one additional generation here. We have about 15 minutes that I wanted to open it up for questions. It's not easy to pass the mic, but I will listen well and restate any questions that get asked. I'm a former teacher, so I'm good at calling on raised hands. Thank you. The question was making a connection between the numbers assigned to Japanese Americans during World War II incarceration and numbers tattooed on Jewish people during the Holocaust, and kind of what that looked like and how that played out during World War II incarceration.
There were 120,000 Japanese people from the Japanese ancestry. 2/3 of us were Americans, and 1/3 were Issei's, like my grandparents. The numbers that we had when we were put into the assembly center was based on the numbers of people, I believe. You can correct me on this.
I just read that.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But we did not have, they were not permanent numbers. We were not tattooed. We had tags that were placed on us.
And those
yes.
tags had to
And
be
the
worn
tags
at all
have to be worn at all times. That's right. Thank you, Lauren. I do remember that.
I just read that. It was in Executive 9066. The numbers were like the first step. It was like, here's the curfews, here's the travel restrictions, and you have 3 weeks to report to the authorities for your family number. So it was like, that was the first step, and then once you had your one suitcase that you could carry, you had your family tag, and there are depictions of children you'll see, and they have a little tag, like a freaking price tag on their collar, and that's because it was like at all times. And Nana remembers, it's like burned in her memory, just, I don't know. Go ahead.
Yes, it was burned. I was 3.5 years old, very little, but you know, you had to remember those numbers like you had to remember a birthday. And my mother worried about me because I was kind of a talkative child, curious about everything, and she wanted me to make sure that my number was with me all the time because I would get lost in that sea of people that looked just like me. So I had to remember that number, 15259, and it was stayed with me my entire life. Yeah.
Thank you. Next. Go ahead.
I can match you.
I think it's important that we also discover our own history here. And so I'm curious about all the stolen land and items. And right now I live in Concordia, northeast Portland, and I'd always heard about Japantown, but I had not realized, it was a really shock to me to find out, I live near Fernhill Park, that was an area of Japanese orchards, and they were taken without compensation. That so much of the wealth that exists here was stolen, not only from Native Americans, but from other people who came like Japanese Americans. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the loss of property and belongings. I mean, you ended up with one suitcase. I know you didn't start out with one suitcase.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good question. My parents had a grocery store in southeast Portland. They moved out of Nihonmachi, and they decided, they were so excited because this was the beginning of their new lives, and they acquired a grocery business. And 2 years after that, the executive order came about. Yes, like Lauren said, we had just so little time. 1 week, 10 days. My parents had to get rid of their store for pennies on the dollar. People took advantage of this. My parents were buying a home, and they had a small loan with the government. And they had to lose the house. They actually lost the house. They lost their purse. They were so fearful of all the Japanese antiques and memories in their home. They had Japanese dolls and kimonos, and what happened was we had some wonderful, wonderful Caucasian friends, and they were very concerned about the things that my parents had acquired, and my grandparents. We all lived together, my grandparents and my parents. And so they said, you know what, let's help you. And they came over to the house with 2 trunks, and they took whatever they could and put it in their trunks, and they said, one day you'll get these back. Unlike my parents and my grandparents in southeast Portland, I had family living here in Nihonmachi, and they lost everything. They lost everything. They had nothing except what they could bring with them in that one suitcase.
It makes me so angry, because I look at like the narrative for the average person saying my family's been here for over 100 years in the same city. That means you've probably got some assets. Your family's been here for a while. Even if they bought the crappiest piece of land 50 years ago, they probably still have it. And we don't have that because of what happened. It makes me mad on an individual level that my family put down roots and worked really hard to operate until they could own a hotel in 1910 in these streets, and they lost what they had worked so hard on. And to your point, it is a loss. No one got stuff back. There are some people that fought years, and maybe 20 years later, you got some of the funds from the business you had. That maybe those business accounts finally got unfrozen in the 50s, maybe. But no one got any money back or any sort of credit for that loan, for that house, for that car, for that business. Nope. People who were, there was one of the sons of the Idaho family was, weeks from graduating from Oregon Law School, and he, done, gone. They said, we can't issue you a degree even if you were able to stay a little longer. But where was I going with that? The reparations is what I also want to point out is, like, I think people hear that Japanese reparations happened and it feels like, okay, well, we're good then, right? And it was such a random, small amount of money for the descendants of the people. My great-grandparents didn't benefit from that. That didn't help them getting restarted back in the 50s or 60s or 70s. It was the reparations couldn't be less of a Band-Aid, and absolutely did not compensate for a damn thing, in my opinion, frankly.
I think the apology from our government was what my parents felt good about. At least somebody said, we're sorry.
That meant more.
Yeah.
I know also, just to add on to that the estimated wealth lost after forced removal was $4 billion worth. And I don't think that number accounts for like the generational wealth that would have been accumulated since then. That's like the one-time estimate of what was lost in that moment. And it's a pretty incomprehensible number to ponder what could have been built from that. And like Joni mentioned, some people were able to reclaim what was lost, and many were not. And it is a difficult moment, a difficult thing to grapple with in the long term. I think we have time for 2 more. Go ahead.
I'm just curious, maybe from your research, can you hear me?
I'm just curious, maybe from your research, how other people reacted to this at the time. I know the media narrative is strong, and if it doesn't get covered, like even today, people wouldn't know about it. Did you find out other people knew about this at the time? Or, it was a major thing. Just curious.
Thank you.
That's why I do what I do, because even today people do not know. It's amazing how many of you have ever studied about this in school. Hands? You have. Okay, there's a handful. It's a small number, isn't it?
Like 2 pages. Like
Right.
2 sentences.
Right.
That was all.
Our education system is such that this is part of American history, and so little of it has been written. I think I mentioned that my late husband and I went to Roseburg High School and spoke to a history class, and I could not believe the number of kids that didn't know anything about this. We were teaching them something. And so your question would be, how many people knew about this?
I think he's speaking more in the time.
In the time,
Here,
yeah.
I've done a little bit of research.
Yeah. Okay, Lauren has done some research on this. Okay, I'll let you.
It's okay. Just speaking, I mean, is that you're thinking in the 40s as this was unfolding?
Yeah.
These were huge government decisions, right? It was like the leader of the Western Defense was making the call, lock them up. And so high ups in the military were all very very agreed upon. And that was decision making, coast to coast, making those kind of decisions. So it by no means was it like an isolated West Coast situation. And if you look at newspapers in that time, while yes, they're totally biased, they're very much reporting in detail what's going on. Portland, Oregonian, there is an article once people were all at the Portland Assembly Center and they started sending them out to camps after a few months being detained at now is the Expo Center. There's a very dark headline from the Oregonian that says, "City is proudly declared Jap free." Yeah, it was a real celebratory line that day. So people definitely knew. One thing I did learn in recent research about Minyasui, which I highly recommend, don't leave today without seeing his actual jail cell that is restored here from Multnomah County Prison. It really is incredible. He was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Honor, Medal of Freedom, first Oregonian in history to ever be awarded that. But he points out in some of his writings, while he was in jail, he was just writing prolific, beautiful letters that we now look at and admire, but he points out that there were a few government figures that said, there's no reason to lock up the Japanese American. This is not going to help us in the war at all. There was a couple people that no one was listening to because it was the military had the voice. It was very much like, this is a wartime decision, period, let's go. So to me, I think a lot about my metaphor when I try to explain real quick to friends how serious the incarceration was. I say, imagine if Guantanamo Bay was in the middle of Idaho and we were all just aware of it happening, because Guantanamo Bay is easy to ignore. It's very far away, but I don't think it was that ignored. I think people really knew about it, and then, after the 50s, we didn't really include it in the history books, so the next generations just didn't talk about it.
They knew about it, but it was negative.
Yes. It was like, let's leave that in the past. Let's not talk about that.
He has a question.
Oh, okay, great. I think that it was very much the majority of the population was on board with what was happening, and I know that a lingering thing in that gets talked about is that a lot of Japanese Americans in the community today are very involved in activism, and I think that some of that stems from that place of there was not an organized response for us, so we need to be that response for others, and I think that is very relevant to both of you. Go ahead.
Thanks. Someone much smarter than I am said, history doesn't repeat itself, people repeat history. Sadly, we've seen a resurgence of anti-Asian hate crime in this country. What does that bring up for you? And it's a very multi-layered question, so we can keep it simple. But the role of government, the role of people. What's happening? Is this, what is this about, and what does this bring up for each of these generations of Americans?
It was George Santayana that said that. History should not repeat itself. That's right. It is when the COVID happened, I saw this happening again.
You told me you got called a slur for the first time in a long time.
Oh yeah, I did. It was not very far from this museum, and I was crossing a street, and somebody yelled out at me, "You, sorry for the word, but they said, you chink, you go home to where you belong." This is the year 2021 that this happened.
Where was it?
It was we were crossing over to the waterfront park, and I had that word yelled at me. Yeah, so this is happening again. And this is why I think Lauren and I do try to educate, because it all comes to your education and how you feel about yourself and of others, and we lack that so much today. All of you are here, but I'm sure you all understand what I'm talking about. I'm going to let Lauren talk a little bit about this, but yes, history does repeat itself, and we cannot let this happen again. We must continue our journey to having people understand, there just has to be more love in our world.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think the important difference in Nana hearing a slur in 1940s Portland versus Nana hearing a slur in 2020 is that in 2021, Nana said it was all she could do to stop from turning around and yelling confident words right back at that man. Yeah. And I'm very proud of her in that regard. You know, it didn't scare her. It didn't make her feel unwelcome. It was like, these are my streets. Don't talk to me like that. Yeah. And that, it means a lot to me to see her not be, not return to that energy with fear, because that's just the nasty cycle. And I do think it's a circular hate, unfortunately, has not gone extinct and takes different forms over time, and it does all come from a place of fear of the other, because you are able to zoom out after you experience that and see you're just a person scared of somebody who's different from you. And once you're able to zoom out, it helps to be less something. But ultimately, I believe that learning more about each other and making others more familiar to us, other types of experiences, is the only way forward. It's the only way to break down those walls of hate, is to show that we really are all, no matter how different we are, no matter how different our lifestyles are, 99.9% of humans on this planet just want a roof over their head. They want their kids to have full bellies and probably get a good education. It's such simple things that we really want and need as humans, and most of us share those desires. So when I hear about these anecdotes, it's angering, but it's also it's so petty, and what a waste of time. What a waste of time to feel that hate and to put energy and voice into it. And for Nana, it's like, all right, what else you got? I've heard this before. We've seen this before. And it's unfortunate to see the resurgence, as you say, but I don't even want to call it a resurgence. I want to just believe that the more we talk, the more we have these experiences and share them with each other. And I hope everyone here, if you took away something from today, talk about it with somebody else later today, and tell them maybe to swing by JMO sometime and check it out, because they might resonate with something here deeply as a Portlander or an Oregonian of any kind. And we could go on and on, I'm sure. It's hard to find an end point to say, what do you think about injustice and racism?
We can go through it.
Of course. Yep, you're exactly right. I don't even know how to close this. We are at 3:01, so we're going to pause and take a break. But before we stretch our legs, hit the restroom, get a drink of water, can we give our two wonderful guests a big round of applause? Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge and wisdom with us today.